Hey everybody, today I want to dive into the most compelling story that's ever been told. The parable of the lost son in Luke chapter 15 is the center of the center when it comes to the Christian faith. It is the most powerful story that Jesus tells, and through it you get a picture of who God is, who we are, and what it means to be truly loved by God. So I'm excited to dive into this with you today. So let's jump right into the passage itself. Luke chapter 15, we're starting at verse 11 if you want to follow along. So Luke is in the New Testament, and it goes Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. These are four different eyewitness accounts of the life, the death, and the resurrection of Jesus. And so Luke chapter 15, verse 11, Jesus continued, "There was a man who had two sons. The younger one said to his father, 'Father, give me my share of the estate.' And so he divided his property between them." Now, to understand the story, you have to get a little bit of the backdrop. There's a couple of things happening that really make the story pop. The first thing is that there's all kinds of people gathered around Jesus. When you look back at chapter 15, verse 1, it says, "The tax collectors and sinners were gathered around Jesus, but the Pharisees and the teachers of the law stood around and muttered." And so you have these people, the outcasts, the broken people, the isolated people, the ones who have never gotten it right, the ones who have been pushed to the fringes of society, both by society itself and the choices that they have made within that society. They can't get enough of Jesus. They have gathered around him and they have been welcomed by him. Not as just members of the community, but as the core of that community. They're at the very center, and they are with Jesus. Meanwhile, the very religious people, the ones who have always gotten it right, the ones who are truly practicing their faith, are kind of standing on the outside, giving commentary, giving their opinions about what Jesus is doing with this movement and this new community. And Jesus is speaking to them all. Everyone is kind of listening in on Jesus. And the things that he is saying are being very disruptive. They are agitating people. They are unsettling people, especially those who are very religious. And so that's the first thing. The second thing that's going on is that this story of the lost son is actually the third story in a series. Jesus has been setting them all up, first by telling the story of the lost sheep, this beautiful story of a shepherd who leaves his 99 sheep to go find the one sheep who is lost, and then he brings it back to the fold. Then he tells a second story where a woman loses this special coin. It's a day's worth of wages. She searches for it. She finds it. And when she finds it, she invites all of her friends to come and celebrate at this party. These two beautiful stories of things that were lost that were found. But Jesus is just setting them up. It's like he's getting their hearts to open up a little bit. They're like primers for what Jesus is going to tell them now. Because this story is not about a coin or a sheep. This is about a family. It's about a son who brings shame to his family. So then when we jump back in and it says there was a man who had two sons. The younger one said to his father, "Father, give me my share of the estate." So he divided his property between them. You need to understand that first century Israel was an honor-shame culture. And so the younger son asks for his inheritance then and there. And when do you normally get your inheritance from your parents? When they die, right? And so for the son to come to his father now and say, "I want my share of the estate now," what is he basically saying to his dad? "I wish you were dead. You are dead to me. I want what you have. I don't want our relationship. I want what you have so that I can go." This would have been absolutely scandalous to the people who were listening to this story. The tax collectors and sinners, they're like, I've made some bad choices in my life, but I've never done anything like that. The religious people who are kind of standing at the perimeter would have gasped at hearing that. You just do not do that in an honor-shame culture. The son breaks one of the 10 commandments, which is honor your father and your mother. He dishonors his father by saying, I want my inheritance now. And not only that, he dishonors the birth order by going above his older brother, who is the representative of the family when he stands in for his father. And so he goes around his brother, showing he doesn't care about him, and asks for his inheritance now. It would have brought absolute shame and disgrace to the family. So for the people listening to this story, they hate the younger brother. They are angry at the younger brother. They have contempt for the younger brother. And here's the other thing. This was not in a quiet suburban neighborhood with a house that's set off far away from the street. These communities were tight-knit, close together, house to house, life to life. So everyone would have heard about this. It was a public disgrace. And you look at the father's response. What's he going to say? He could call for punishment for his son right then and there, to break one of the 10 commandments, to break honor your father and mother. He could have had his son dragged into the public courtyard and stoned to death. People would have said, that's harsh, but that's fair. And he would have been entitled to do that. But instead, it says he just divided the estate between them. He says nothing. Everyone's giving commentary. Why didn't he say something? What should he have said? Hey, great parenting, just letting that whole thing go. There would have been all kinds of commentary around what the father was doing. So he divided his property between them. Not long after that, the younger son got together all he had and set off for a distant country where he squandered his wealth in wild living. So most scholars believe that this younger son, who probably grew up in rural Galilee, took all the money that he had from his father and then went off to the region of the Decapolis, which is a region on the other side of the Sea of Galilee that is heavily Greek in population and in culture. So if you were a good, religious Jewish young man growing up in rural Galilee, you would never go to the Greek cities on the other side of the Sea of Galilee. So the fact that he did this shows once again that he doesn't care about the religion. He doesn't care about his family. He's just going to go and live it up. He's the most selfish person that you know. So he goes and sets off for the distant country. And there he squandered his wealth in wild living. So he just blew it all, every last dime. And after he had spent everything, there was a severe famine in the whole country, and he began to be in need. And so he went and hired himself to a citizen of that country who sent him to his fields to feed pigs. So his life bottoms out. And for those of you who don't know anything about Judaism, here's a little Judaism 101. What do Jewish people abstain from when it comes to diet? Pork, right? And so here's this guy whose life is bottoming out, and he has to go work on a pig farm because he can't find anything else. And in an honor-shame culture, this brings humiliation and shame to his life. And so things can't get much worse for him. And it even says he went out to the field to feed pigs, and he longed to fill his stomach with the pods that the pigs were eating, but no one gave him anything. And I know what you're thinking. You're thinking the same thing I'm thinking. You kind of have this feeling inside where you're like, good. I'm glad that happened to him. I hope he starves working for that pig farm. He deserves it. And what is that? What is that feeling that we have? That we want to see him fail. We have this thing inside of us where we're like, he got what he deserved. We have this thing inside of us where we want to see people get retribution. And we love retributive justice. And so here's this guy getting what he deserves, and we feel like that's the right thing to have happened. And Jesus has you right where he wants you, because the whole crowd would have been right there too. Verse 17, when he came to his senses, he said, "How many of my father's hired servants have food to spare, and here I am starving to death? I will set out and go back to my father and say to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and sinned against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants.' So he got up and went to his father." Listen carefully to what he's saying. His life is bottomed out. He's had that turning point moment, came to his senses, and he's like, "I'm going to go home." But he knows that he can't go back to the way things were. So he's hoping that by going home, by writing this speech, that his father will bring him back into the household as a hired servant. And here's the key word. He's like, "I will go back to my father, and I'll say to him," here's his speech, "Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer," and here's the key word, "worthy to be called your son." His identity has changed. He is living in his shame, and he's no longer worthy to be called your son. So he'll settle to be one of the hired servants. And he got up and went to his father. So the suspense has reached a fever pitch. He's going to walk back into his hometown where everyone knows who he is and what he's done. And he's going to go to his father and ask him to move back in to the servant quarters. And so everyone's wondering what's going to happen in this story. And so he's heading there. He got up and went to his father. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion for him. He ran to his son, threw his arms around him, and kissed him. When Jesus drops this line of the story, the whole crowd either gasped, or maybe you could just hear a pin drop of disbelief. Because what you expect is that the son starts heading home, his father sees him, and is filled with rage towards him. You think it's going to say his father went to him and said, "Who do you think you are? How dare you walk back into this house? I was dead to you, and now you are dead to me." It would have been a spectacle. Everyone would have gathered around and said, "Wow, that was harsh, but fair." That's what should happen. But it says, while he was still a long way off, his father saw him. Why did his father see him? Because he's always been looking for him. He's looked for him every single day. He's looked to the horizon, that hillside, the road coming off that hill, hoping every day that he would see his son come home. And his father recognized him from a long ways off, because a parent always recognizes their children, even at a distance. His father saw him, and he was filled with compassion for him. And in the Greek, it's like an emotion welled up inside, like he felt it in his gut, in his heart. By seeing his son come home, it did something to him. He saw him, was filled with compassion for him. He ran to his son, threw his arms around him, and kissed him. A couple of things. One, again, this is not in a suburban setting where it's a long, winding driveway, shielded by the trees, making it a private event. No, he's going down the public main street of this community, making it a public spectacle to hug and embrace his son. That's the first thing. Here's the second thing, and this one's kind of funny. He runs to his son. In the ancient world, grown men don't run for a couple of reasons. One, that's something that children do, and men are proud. Things happen on their timeline. They take their time. They're walking from place to place, and even if they're late, hey, it's my time. I'm walking there. So there's one reason. The second is very practical. Men in the first century wore sandals, which are hard to run in. Men in the first century had long tunics and cloaks that went down almost to their ankles. So if you take off on a run, it's quite possible that your foot would catch your tunic and you would fall on your face and you'd be humiliated in front of everyone. So if you're going to take off and run a distance, you have to kick off your sandals. You have to hike up your tunic. You have to get some upper man thigh out there, and you have to get running, bringing humiliation and shame to him and his family anyways. So he runs to his son. He throws his arms around him. He kisses him. Has his son given the speech? Was his father's compassion evoked by the words of repentance and sorrow and apology that the son had? No, his son hasn't given the speech. He didn't even say a word. The father went and embraced him, and he did it no matter what the son was going to say, even if he said nothing. There was nothing that caused the father to come. Finally, the son is able to speak. And it says, the son said to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and sinned against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. And the father cuts him off. He doesn't let him finish the speech. It's like as soon as he said, I'm not worthy to be called your son, his dad interrupts him. And it says, the father said to his servants, quick, bring the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Bring the fattened calf and kill it. Let's have a feast and celebrate. For this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. So they began to celebrate. The father brings out the family robe. He brings out the family ring. And he reinstates his son to be a part of the family once again. All right, so you have to understand what Jesus is doing here by telling this story. In the world of ancient religion, it was all about managing the distance between you and God. There was no relationship. There was no connection to be had. You would go to the temple and all over the world, and you would bring your sacrifices, you would bring your prayers, and your hope is that the gods would be satisfied by what you have done. They would be appeased by what you have done, and maybe for a moment smile upon you for what you have done. But there was no restored relationship. There was no connection. And so you have to understand, Jesus did not come to start a new religion. Jesus came to end religion. If religion was about managing the distance between you and God, and by what you are doing, bringing yourself closer to God, then Jesus embodies a bold declaration that God is closer than you could ever know. And he has pursued you because you are loved by him. Jesus didn't come to start a new religion. He came to end religion and start a revolution. Jesus' life is a declaration that you are not primarily a sinner in the hands of an angry God, but you are a child pursued by a loving God. That you are worthy, that you matter, and that you are loved primarily because you are loved by God, or primarily because you matter to God. And just as the great Christian spiritual writer Philip Yancey said, there's nothing you can do to make God love you less. And there's nothing you can do to make God love you more. You are simply and beautifully loved. And this declaration would have been absolutely scandalous, disruptive, unsettling to all the people around him. People would have been coming to Jesus saying, you don't understand. That's not how the system works. That's not how religion works. And we've built an entire system on top of this idea of who God is and who we are, that we are distant and need to come to the temple, and God is far off and needs to be appeased through sacrifices and behavior. It's actually a really big part of the economy. And Jesus would have said, well, I guess we need to change the economy. And I guess we need to change the whole thing. And that's what the kingdom of God is really all about. Different sermon for a different day. But like I said, this is scandalous. And once you think about that, you remember, oh yeah, the older brother. What happened to the older brother? So here he comes. Meanwhile, verse 25, the older son was in the field, working, doing his job. He's always done his job. When he came near the house, he heard music and dancing. So he called one of the servants and asked him, what's going on? Your brother has come, he replied, and your father has killed the fattened calf because he has him back safe and sound. And the older brother became angry and he refused to go in. I actually totally understand how he feels. So his father went out and pleaded with him. But he answered his father, look, all these years I've been slaving for you and never disobeyed your orders, yet you never gave me even a young goat so I could celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours, I love that, it's not brother of mine, it's son of yours who has squandered your property with prostitutes come home, you killed the fattened calf for him. You see, the older brother has won at religion. He's done all the right things. He's checked all the right boxes. In his mind, that has made him worthy. He's gained it all. He's earned it all. But the problem with that is when you keep track of religion like that, when you live out a religion like that, is it becomes about comparison. It becomes about resentment. You start keeping score, and you never truly get to live free because you think you've earned it all, so you are hanging on so tight. And it makes you resentful of other people who you feel like aren't really doing it, and they seem to have so much freedom and joy, and it drives you crazy. So as it turns out in this story, there's not just one lost son. There's two. They're just lost in different ways. And so this older son has been grabbing on to the things he's done in his life, the trophies that he's acquired, hoping that by doing it right, he will have earned his father's love. And that's what will have made him worthy. And his dad just looks at him and he's like, I've actually always loved you. It didn't matter. I would have loved you even if you failed. I would have loved you even if you would have dropped out of college. I would have loved you even if you wouldn't have been successful in all the ways that we define success. You were loved no matter what. And he offers the invitation to the older son. It's still on the table. You can still join the party. You can still come in and celebrate and experience freedom and joy and the peace of just being loved. The invitation is on the table. And the father said, my son, you are always with me and everything I have is yours. But we had to celebrate and be glad because this brother of yours was dead and is alive again. He was lost and he's found. And another reason why this is such a brilliant story, Jesus just leaves the story open-ended. He just drops it right there, with the older son standing outside of the party, trying to decide if he's going to go in and celebrate. The father standing out there with him. Now he's waiting for him in the same way that he waited for the younger brother. And he gets to choose. And Jesus kind of leaves the story open because the kingdom is always open. And we get to choose. We've experienced the love of God. We've seen the love of God. The invitation is on the table. And now what are we going to do? And friends, my prayer for you is that you may know that you are worthy, that you matter, and that you are loved by God because you already belonged to Him. And may that change your life in the same way that this has changed people for 2,000 years. And may you go in peace. And the grace and the peace of God can still move people's hearts. Can I get an amen?
Amen. Whenever you're ready.
All right, I'm just going to warm up a little bit. Chris Cuomo is courageous. Chris Cuomo is courageous. The sip of sunshine smells sensational. Sip of sunshine smells sensational. Preach it! I don't even think this makes sense. The sermon doesn't even sound good right now. I'm not happy with it.